welcome to Crime in Court. This is the Delphi trial transcript read through. We are reading the transcript of Indiana versus Richard Allen in the homicides of Libby German and Abby Williams. And we are on the state's case part 6. Today we have two law enforcement officers. One is Detective Darren Giancola, and then the other is Sergeant Jason Page. We're gonna get through Jason Page's direct, and then we'll break there, and then continue his in part 7. So it's a little lengthy, so just giving you the heads up of where we're at. So let us please get started. We're going to just dive right in to where we left off, which was there were two individuals on the stand, both family friends of the Patties. One of them found the shirt. So it's just very interesting that two family friends, before we get started here. Um, so it's very interesting that two family friends of the Patty family happened to be part of the search and happened to find one found the shirt, the clothing that was in Deer Creek, and then the other one found the bodies. So just keep that in mind. That's who we just heard from last. So now we're going to dive into the direct examination of Detective Darren Giancola. Please hit the like button and let's get started. All right, so Nick McLeland is going to be doing the questioning for the state. Deputy, are you as comfortable as you can be in that chair? As I can be, yes. Okay. Gonna ask you to speak up the best you can. The microphone amplifies for the audience, but it doesn't for us and defense and the jury, and so everybody needs to be able to hear your answers. Fair enough? Fair. All right. Will you state your name, please? Darren Giancola. And how are you employed? With the Carroll County Sheriff's Office. And what is your rank with the Carroll County Sheriff's Department currently? Currently, a detective. And how long have you been employed total with the Carroll County Sheriff's Department? Since 2011, but in there was a 6-month leave and then I came back. As a law enforcement officer, did you have to go through special education or training? Yes. Can you tell me about that? I graduated the Law Enforcement Academy, mandated training annually, and I attended multiple trainings in niche areas like drug investigations and interviewing, things like that. Is that done on an annual basis? I attend some sort of extra training every year by my choice, yes. Okay. And again, been a law enforcement officer since 2011, is that correct? Actually, since 2009, with the sheriff's office since 2011, I was with the Delphi City Police from 2009 to 2011. So another connection to Delphi, which is just really kind of bizarre. And in your role as a law enforcement officer, is it fair to say you've investigated all types of offenses? The majority, yes. I want to take you back to February 13th of 2017. Do you recall that day? I do. And were you on duty that day? I was not. What shift do you typically work? At that time, I was working a night shift from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. as a road patrol deputy, and that would have been one of my regular scheduled nights off. However, you came into work that night, is that correct? That's correct. I want to take you to around 10 p.m. that evening. Can you tell me what happened? I had seen something on social media about two missing juveniles in Delphi. I contacted now Sergeant Kingery because he was deputy on duty that night, and he advised there was going to be some search efforts going, so I came to help. Did you get the identity of the two missing juveniles? Yes. And who were they? Libby German, and Abby Williams. After you got that information, what did you do? I believe I went to the sheriff's office and was helping look through some electronics that belonged to one of the girls, but they were locked, so we couldn't get into them. Did you have information of where the girls went missing? I was told their last known location was near the High Bridge. So after you completed your activities at the jail, what did you do next? I went out and actively helped in the physical search. And do you recall where you went to help with the search? Yes, I went to, it was a private drive at the end of 625 West. Judge, I'd ask the court permission if the witness can come to the map so that he can point that out to the jury. The court says you may. Mr. McClellan says officer or deputy detective. One of them you'll get right. Sorry, Giancola. I've had you come, I'll have you come down to the map and I'm going to have you use this pointer, okay? I'm going to have you use this pointer and I want you to step back as far as you can so the jury can see the map. Can the jury see the map, okay? Okay. Point out where you went. After you left the jail, you went out to assist in the search. Is that your testimony? That's correct. And where did you go? So I would have accessed this private road here. This is 625 West, and it dead ends into a private drive that takes you to the into the woods back. It goes underneath a section of the High Bridge. I believe somewhere in this wooded area here is where I teamed up with some civilians and fire department personnel, and we began searching that area. Can you point that area out on the map? Somewhere right in here, just south of the bridge, right in here. You were still in the private drive on 625. I parked my car there and then exited, and we were, if I recall right, we were in like a line from the creek to the drive, a line of people pushing north. Do you know what time of night that was? It was dark. It was midnight or so. Remember the search stopped at like 2 in the morning. So he was out at he was out quite late during the search, but there would have only been about 2 hours left in the search at that point. And this is a silly question. What were you using to search? A flashlight. And how far around you could you see with that flashlight? Not very far. That's why we do a chain like that, so that, because you can only see so far. So if there's a decent space between the people in the search party, but we try to make a line so that nothing gets missed. And you believe there was a line of people from the private drive to the creek? That's correct. And how far did you go with that search? I believe I was somewhere over here in the northern side of the bridge, between the creek and the bridge, when I got the notification that the search was being called off and to report back. Well, once you got to that side of the bridge, and I'm going to say the northeast side of the bridge, you were still actively looking for the girls. Is that correct? Yes. And when you got to that side of the bridge, there's something that's stuck out in your mind. Is that right? Yes. Can you tell me about that? So, as I got underneath private drive, the private drive goes underneath and along I guess you could almost call it like a bank. Under the bridge, there's a large section of limestone or cinder block. And I was climbing up those and looking for anything, and I could see a wash of the leaves down the side of whoops, sorry, hold on. I had to switch pages here and I wasn't ready. Let me go back. I could see a wash of the leaves down the side of the hill that was exposing the bare ground, and that immediately stuck out to me as odd. And I'm going to zoom in on, and for the record, we're looking at States Exhibit 5. Can you point out where you saw the disturbance? Right here somewhere. And was that at the end of the Monon High Bridge? Yes, it's where it ends. Remember that's about the area where the bridge guy video takes place as well. So if there was some kind of disturbance in the ground that maybe like a slide in the leaves or something where it looks like there might have been a struggle, perhaps, something. And tell me, where was the disturbance leading? Oh, sorry. And was that at the end of Monenhigh Bridge? He says yes, right where it dead ends. And tell me where was the disturbance leading to? In a downward angle from the top of it, from the top of the hill, from the area above the bridge downwards. Detective, I'm going to have you ask you to have a seat back in the witness stand, please. Yep, you can just set that over here. Thank you. Detective, I'm going to show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 9 through 13. Can you take a look at those, please? Detective, have you had an opportunity to look through those? Yes. And it's a silly question, but what are those? They're pictures of the north side of the bridge of the north side of the end of that bridge. Are those pictures that you took? No, sir. And do you know when those pictures were taken? No, sir. Do those pictures accurately represent what you saw on the late night, early morning, the 13th, February 13th, and February 14th, the disturbance that you testified about? Do those accurately depict what you saw? Yes. Judge, the state would move to admit what's been marked as States Exhibits 9 through 13. And Mr. Baldwin says no objection. The court says all right, without objection, 9 through 13 are admitted. Mr. McClellan says, and Judge, I would ask permission from the court to publish those pictures to the jury. I've stapled them together just for convenience, and I ask the court permission of that at this point. The court says, oh, so you have cop. Yes, you may. Oh, she was going to say copies. Mr. McClellan says, I have copies for the jury. Yes. The court says, okay. And ladies and gentlemen, take the time that you need to review those photographs. When you're done, just kind of look up so I know that you're finished. And Mr. McClellan goes on, and detective, while the jury's reviewing those, I'm going to ask you to hold on to these because we're going to reference those in future questions. Court says you may proceed. Mr. McClellan says, thank you, Judge. For the record, Detective, I've handed you back the pictures that's been marked States Exhibit 9 through 13, and I've got a copy for myself. I want to talk about a few of these pictures. I want to go to the first one. Can you hold the first picture up, States Exhibit 9, and point to the jury where you were standing? So if you look towards the right, middle half of the picture, there's all the concrete, kind of jagged concrete. That was the area that I was standing in when I shined that section with my flashlight and could see that disturbance in the leaves. But people had been out and searching for quite some time. Like this wasn't a contained area either. So, I mean, is it evidence? Is it not? We don't know. And maybe it's something that they're trying to play off as the bigger deal than it really is. I don't know. Let's find out. Okay. And can you point out, you may have done that just now, can you point out the disturbance for the jury that you're talking about? It's right in the center of this photo towards the top of the hill. You can see the bare ground exposed. And I want to move on to State's Exhibit 10. Can you point out in that photo the disturbance for the jury's reference? So this one's oriented like this would be the proper way. In the very center of the top of the photo, you can see the bare ground towards the top of the hill. Then I want to move on to State's Exhibit 11. And in that photo, can you point out the disturbance to the jury, please? This is from the top looking down and it's right in the center. You can see the darker portion of the ground is where the disturbance is. There's a gravel portion, or yeah, there's a gravel portion of that picture at the bottom. Do you see that? Yes. Tell me what that is. That's more or less the end of the trail. It's a railroad bed gravel. The end of the Monon High Bridge? Yes. Okay, I want to move on to State's Exhibit 12. Can you point out the disturbance in that photo for the jurors? The disturbance is towards the left upper portion. You can make it out by the brown, the darker color showing the dirt exposed. And can you point to the end of the Monon High Bridge in that picture? It's more or less directly up on top of the hill from that disturbance. And State's Exhibit 13, is that just another angle of the end of the bridge? Yes, sir. Okay, Detective Giancola, after you noted that this disturbance, what did you do next? There was a member of the fire department with me, I believe, and I pointed it out to him, and he thought maybe it was from. I don't want you to testify about what he thought. Sorry. But just you pointed out to a fire department individual that was with you? Yeah, brought it to his attention. Did you continue to search after that? Yes. And what time did you end the search? I'm going to say that night. I believe it was after 2 a.m., sometime around 2 a.m. On February 14th. Yes, after midnight. Yes, into the 14th. Okay. And the time that you ended the search, what did you do after that? Just go home? Yes, I went back home and they were going to assemble at 7:30 in the morning, so I went home and tried to get some rest. At that point that you ended the search, were you investigating a murder? No. Did you think anything bad had happened to the girls at that point? At that point, no. They're missing. You don't think something bad might have happened? What was your thought? Well, I'd worked in this field for a while leading up to this and had many cases like this, and not knowing who they were or anything like that, we've had several cases where juveniles will either run away or go with friends to a movie or something, and then it's like they're missing, but then they usually show back up. So you went home last night or that night? You went home that night? When did you report back to work? 7:30 in the morning. Still on the February 14th? Yes. Were you scheduled to be on duty that day? No. Okay, when you reported to work at 7:30 a.m. on the 14th, where did you go? Where did you report to? I believe I reported to the sheriff's office first. And what did you do from there? I did some clerical things like contacting landowners to make sure that we could get permission so search parties weren't trespassing, and I did some things like that. At some point, were you tasked with visiting one of the landowners to see what information you can gather from that owner? Yes. Could you tell me about that, please? I went to an address, I believe it was off 575 West near 300 North. He had called in and said that he had numerous trail cameras on his property, and myself and another deputy were going to go there to try to pull the footage to see if we could find anything. And what happened on your way to that residence? On the way there, I got a call from Detective Liggett telling me to get to the cemetery off of 300 North immediately. So I want to know more about these trail cameras and did anything ever come of those? Interesting. Um, Detective Liggett says to come to this other spot, the cemetery. And Detective, would you be willing to come to the map again and point out, yes, the cemetery that you were directed to? Yes, so I believe the property we were going to look at, the trail cameras of is right here. It's one of those two houses. I can't quite recall, but the cemetery is right here. And did you report to the cemetery? I did. And what happened when you got to the cemetery? We parked and began walking south into the woods from the cemetery. Well, let me stop you. You say we. Who was with you? Deputy Yoder. Okay. So you stop at the cemetery, you get out, you park, and what happens next? We start to walk down it's a really steep wooded area down towards the creek, and we passed a female that was coming up the hill that was extremely distraught. Well, I'm going to zoom in. States Exhibit 5. Can you show the jury the path that you took from the cemetery down to the creek as best of your recollection? I don't think that I could show the exact path I took, but I would have been just in the northern direction towards the creek from, I believe we parked right here in the corner, and there was kind of a fence we had to kind of go around, and then we walked straight south towards the creek. And did you walk directly to the creek? Yes. And on your way to the creek, well, did you see the bodies of the girls? No, sir. And why were you going to the creek? Well, we were told that members of the search party had located something there, possibly bodies. So I knew they were down there and I just needed to get there to them. And then they were down kind of near the water's edge. And did you walk to the water's edge? Yes. And when you got there, did you encounter other people? Yes. And how many other people did you encounter? I believe there were four people on the north side of the creek, and then there was a few people on the south side of the creek, directly across from where we were standing. And was Deputy Yoder with you as well? Yes. Okay, when you got to the creek, what did you see? I had to ask everybody, like, point me where what are you talking about? And everybody was pointing into the water kind of directly in front of me. And that's when I looked over and see a multicolored shirt and I believe a tennis shoe was stuck in like the roots that come out into the creek from the creek bank. And that was in the water? Yes. So Libby's shirt and one of her Nike shoes was in the water. Okay, I'm going to ask you to have a seat back at the witness stand, please. Detective, I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 14 through 17. Can you please take a look at those exhibits or what have been marked as exhibits? I'm sorry, Detective. Have you had the opportunity to look through those photos? Yes, sir. Do those accurately depict what you saw when you got to the creek on February 14th, 2017? Yes. Did you take these photos? No, sir. Do you know when these photos were taken? I do not. And are they a true representation of what you observed on that day at the creek? Yes. Judge, the state would move to admit what's been marked as State's Exhibits 14 through 17. Baldwin says no objection. The court says all right. Without objection, those are included. Mr. McClellan says, and Judge, I'd ask the court permission to publish those to the jury. She says you may, and you may proceed after they were published. Mr. McClellan says, thank you, Your Honor. Detective, I want to draw your attention to the first picture. Can you point out to the jury where you were at when you approached the creek? Where were you standing? So in the picture, you can kind of tell that where the picture is taken is creek level, and then the topography kind of goes up and it's elevated. I was standing on the elevated portion looking down at this debris that's in the very, very center of this photo. I'm going to move on to the next picture. Can you describe the picture for the jury? This would more or less be my vantage point from that I just described of where I was standing facing down. Can you point out where you saw the clothes at that picture? They're on the left section of this photograph in this rooty kind of debris looking material in the water. And then the next two photos, can you describe those to the jury, please? Again, in this one, it's this would be like my vantage point of looking down into the water when I first got there. You can see a multicolored piece of clothing on the left section of the brush, and then there's like a black and white Nike shoe in the center. And then move to the last picture, please. Is that a close up of what you observed in the creek on that day? Yes, it is. And can you point out the shoe that you saw? The shoe's right in the center. It's upright, light sole, and I think it's a white Nike shoe. And you mentioned a multicolor or tie-dyed shirt that you saw. Can you point that out in the photo? That's in the top left portion of this debris in this photograph. Thank you, detective. After you observed the clothes in the creek, what happened next? There was some conversation there was people across the creek kind of hollering to us. There was the searchers on our side of the creek were talking to us, and one of the searchers on our side of the creek said that they believed the girls' bodies were back behind us a little ways and kind of to the northeast of where we were at. When you say back behind you and to the northeast, you meaning this direction? Yes. Okay, on your walk down to the creek, did you see the bodies? No. After the search party members told you the bodies were behind you, did you turn around and look? Yes. Could you see them from your vantage point? I could see something that kind of stuck out like a whitish color, but I couldn't tell what it was from where I was at, and I still kind of needed them to direct me was it, I asked them, was it over here? Yes, and I went that direction. Did Deputy Yoder go with you? Yes. And what did you see? The bodies of both girls deceased. Can you describe what you saw? One was nude, the other was clothed. And did you recognize who they were? Yes. And how did you recognize who they were? Based off of photographs that were circulating around. Were they deceased? Yes. Did you notice any injuries on the bodies? Yes. Can you tell me about that? Both had large lacerations on their throats. Did you notice blood in other areas? Yes. Can you tell me about that, please? Both had a substantial amount of blood on their person and underneath them. So both on their bodies and on the ground below them. And how close did you get to the bodies? Maybe 10 yards. When you approached the bodies, was anyone else around them? No. And after you observed the bodies, did you attempt any life-saving measures for the two girls? No, sir. Why not? It was apparent that they were deceased. Once you saw where the bodies were located, do you have an estimate of how far away you were from them when you left the cemetery and walked down to the creek initially? It would have been more than 30 or 40 yards. And during your walk down to the creek, did you notice them at all? No, sir. Upon discovering the bodies, what did you do next? Well, I had Deputy Yoder begin taking down the names of the people that were on our side of the creek, and I contacted Detective Liggett via telephone immediately and told him what I had discovered. And what did you do after that? I stood by to make sure no one accessed the crime scene until the proper people got there. So he secured the crime scene, which is something that they don't know how to do in the Karen Reed case. During your time as you're standing there, did anyone get near the bodies? No. Did anyone access the area where you were standing, meaning within 10 yards of the bodies? No. How long was it before after officers arrived? It was not very long at all. Within minutes, some troopers started showing up and then investigators started showing up. When you say troopers, do you mean officers with the Indiana State Police? Yes, sir. Sorry. And were officers with the Indiana State Police the first to arrive? Yes, after, yes. Okay, once they arrived, what did they do? Well, one of them began a scene log to log everybody that's in the scene, and the other began to put up crime scene tape to preserve the scene. And during your time you were there, once the crime scene tape was up, did any individuals enter beyond the crime scene tape? No. Once ISP troopers and other detectives got there, what did you and Deputy Yoder do? Once the proper investigators were there, we signed out, left the crime scene, and then I believed it was Detective Liggett directed us to the opposite side of the creek, kind of where I was searching the night before, to make sure no one tried to access the crime scene from that side. And I'm going to direct your attention to State's Exhibit 5 again. When you say that the other side of the creek, what do you mean this side? Do you mean this side? And he says, yes, sir. And the night before you testified, you were searching over in this area? Yes. When you went to the other side of the creek upon Detective or Sheriff or, sorry, Detective Liggett's direction, did you use the did you use the lane or private drive at 625 to get to where you were going? I did, yes. And what area? Where did you stop? Just past the bridge. So this area right here? Yes. Okay, and what did you do once you got there? We made sure that everybody had cleared out, and I believe I talked to Shane Haygood briefly. And once I talked to him, we made sure everybody was out of that area and no one else was to come back into that area. What was the point of stationing there? Because you could access the crime scene just by crossing the river, because just by crossing the river. And so, was it for crime scene security? Yes. Okay, and how long did you stay there? I stayed there all night until the break of light the next day. So all night the 14th until the sometime around morning of the 15th. Yes, sometime around 8 or 9 in the morning, I think I got relieved. When you were relieved, was it light out? Yes. Okay. During the time that you were stationed, make sure I make this question clear. During the time that you were stationed here for scene security, was there traffic in and out on 625? No. Were there any vehicles egressing or progressing down 625 during the time that you were there? No. Were there any people? No. Did you see any people travel across the creek during the time that you were there? No. Officer, back in 2000 or February 13th of 2017, were you carrying a firearm? Yes. Can you tell me what kind of firearm? A Glock 17. Can you tell me what caliber that firearm is? 9 millimeter. If you know, was anybody in the Carroll County Sheriff's Department carrying the same gun? Yeah, we had just recently switched to the Glock 17. Were they all 9 millimeters? Yes. Okay, and you're confident of that? Very confident, yes. Okay. Do you know when you switched over? I don't know when. It was within a year before that. Okay. I don't have any other questions, Judge. Thank you. The court throws it to Mr. Baldwin, and Mr. Baldwin says thank you. And now we've got cross examination of Detective Darren Giancola. All right. Mr. Baldwin asks that, can we go back to 14? Do you have those? I do not, sir. No. Oh, I'm sorry, not 14. I want to go back to 9. I'm publishing to you the exhibit. Thank you. If you could go through the packet, tell me when you're ready. Would you agree with me that those photographs, which are right next to the bridge, the end of the bridge, do not do a terrific job of really detailing how steep that area is from the top of the bridge down to the access road? I feel like you can tell that it's fairly steep based on this photograph, one of these photographs, yes. So it is steep. Is it fairly steep? Yes. And I mean, it would be to get down there, it would be wise to be holding on to trees and so forth as you're going down to make sure that you don't tumble down or fall. Would you agree? Yes. Okay, here, I'll take that back from you. Thank you. And just so that it's clear, so I'm facing the high bridge. If I'm facing the high bridge at that end, the south end towards right now, let's say I'm facing the high bridge that way towards the Freedom Bridge, okay? You got that in your brain? Not really, sir. Um, okay, sorry. So if I'm traveling south on the high bridge and get to the end like this, and then turn around like that, and I'm facing back towards the beginning. Are you with me now? Sure, yes. So just to be clear, where these photos were taken, where the kind of the dirt was, that's over here going down that way, right? It's off the main section of to the right. If I follow you correctly, which can you show me on the map maybe? Sure. It's to the No, when you get off that bridge, those are to the right over to the west. I'm sorry, east of the bridge, correct? Yes. All right, and that's where those slide marks are to the east. Yes. And then over on the other side, there's kind of it's not as steep for some reason, is it? Over on the other side of the bridge. You could go down to the right side. It's steeper than if you went down this way, and it's less steep. I don't recall what the other side of the bridge looks like. Okay, but based upon the steepness of that area where you saw the slide marks, you weren't surprised to see slide marks there, I guess. I was surprised. That's why it was brought to my attention when I saw it with my flashlight. It just seemed odd. Okay, and just so we're clear, underneath the leaves and where the slide marks are, where dirt is correct, or where it is dirt, right? Can I say that? Underneath the leaves and where the slide marks were done is dirt, right? Yes. Okay. You said that you stopped this search around 2 a.m. If I recall right, yes, sir. Sometime a little after 2. That's before 4:33 a.m. Is that correct? Yes. You said that you were on your way to get trail cam video a second ago. Yes, sir. But then you got called before that? Yes. Did you ever go get that trail cam video later? No, sir. What? So there's potentially trail cam out there that never got collected. Do you know if anybody did? I'm not aware of it. And just so the jury understands, when you go down that from the cemetery down to where the girls were found, that's also got some steepness to it, doesn't it? Yes, sir. And once you get down to where the girls are, it's relatively flat? Yes. And the people that you encountered at the near the creek when you came down from the cemetery area, do you know from where they had come from? I do not. Were you aware if one of the people that you had encountered had seen the multicolored shirt, for example, from on the other side of the creek? Was I aware that someone on my side of the creek had seen it from the other side? Is that what you're? Yeah, no, that was not a great question on my part. So let me try it again. You're fine. There were people on the opposite side of the creek, on the south side of the creek. Yes. And so you're on this side, and the multicolored shirt was in the creek right here in this area, and some people over on the other side. Is that correct? That's correct. And it's your understanding that people all the way on the other side saw a multicolored shirt from the other side? That was my understanding later when talking to one of them, yes. So pretty visible. The multicolored shirt, would you agree? From where I was at, yeah, from right off the bank. And if somebody else had seen it from the other side, well, I can't attest to if it's visible to someone else or not from. Well, that's fair. And you had testified that when you saw the two girls that both had, I wrote it down, substantial blood on their person. Is that correct? Yes. Are you sure that both had substantial blood on their person, or was it just one? As I recall seeing it, yes, there was substantial amount of blood around both of them. Okay, was it around both of them or on both of them? As I recall, Libby had it all over her and around her, and Abby, it was just in the general area of her wound and beside her. Yeah, it wasn't on her person here that you could see, right? I don't recall if I remember seeing it on her body. Well, could you tell whether there was wet marks like, like when you go into a creek and it's up to here and he indicates and you get out and you'll see wet marks from here down and it's dry from here up and you know what I'm talking about? Yes. Could you see if there was wet marks, noticeable wet marks from any part of the body down that separated itself from drier parts, marks above? I recall noting that the clothing of Abby Williams had appeared to be wet, but I was as a w- as far as a water line, if you will, I don't recall anything like that. And when you say appear to be wet, that was just from your visualization? Yes, sir. You didn't go and touch and see? No, sir. And what part, you don't recall what part seemed appear to be wet? I want to say the pants, that's what I recall. The pants were wet, appear to be wet. Could somebody maybe have, maybe there was a lot of blood on them and somebody rinsed them in the creek before they put them on her? Because remember, she's wearing Libby's pants. And when you were going from the creek down, when you were going from the cemetery down to the creek, that was because you had heard that somebody was at the creek and wanted to talk to you. Is that correct? That's correct. So your mission was to go from the cemetery down to the creek to find these people. Is that right? That's correct. It wasn't really to be looking around for anything. You had a mission. I'm going down there to meet these people. That they had located something, that's what I was told. So you weren't really looking. When you said earlier you didn't see the bodies, you weren't really looking for the bodies at that time. I was looking, but I was looking for the people and to find out where I'm going. So people down at the creek. All right. Did you say that you called? Who did you say that you called from when you saw the bodies? Detective Liggett. And did your phone work? Yes. And is that your own cell phone or is that a I don't recall if I was using my department cell phone or at that time or my personal cell phone. Okay. Do you know what your cell phone carrier is for your personal cell phone back then? AT&T. AT&T. Okay. And do you know what the cell phone provider is for the I don't know if you know this or not, but do you know what the Carroll County cell phone provider is? He says now it's FirstNet, which is through AT&T. I don't remember if we had switched to that at that point, but now it's FirstNet. Okay. Well, do you know what it was before? Judge objection asked and answered. Sustained. No other questions. Thank you. Mr. McLeland says, sorry, the court says Mr. McLeland, and he says, thank you, Judge. And we've got some redirect here. Detective Giancola, Mr. Baldwin asked you a question about the area where the girls were found was flat. Do you recall that question? Yes. The area around where the girls were found, was that flat? I guess you got to figure out what's your definition of flat in the woods. I mean, nothing perfectly flat in the woods, but compared to the hill down, like he asked me, yes, it wasn't a hill. Right, but there were in they were in a place that at least you didn't notice them on your walk down from the cemetery to the creek, correct? Correct. And you weren't able to see the bodies completely when you looked back from the creek to where you were located? That's correct. So, where they were found, was it an elevated position or was it a flat area that was lower in elevation? That whole area is, like I said, your definition of flat or whatever, but it's that whole area has low topography up and down but it's not steep. Okay. But there's from the creek flooding and things like that, but they were in an area that was kind of a dip in the surface. So when you talk about kind of rolling, I'm going say peaks and valleys, although I understand it's not mountains, they were found in a valley? Correct. Okay, I don't have any other questions, Judge. Court says, Mr. Baldwin? No other questions, thank you. Does anybody from the jury have any questions for Detective Giancola? Would counsel approach? So it looks like we do. So now we go into a sidebar conference, and the court says, I'm going to stand here so they don't see me talk. Now, you're fine. We're fine. You're fine. The question is, quote, you stated that electronics were being viewed 21317 before going to search the girls initially. What were the electronics being viewed? Mr. McLeland says, that's a good question. Court says, great question. Mr. McLeland says, they've had good questions. The court says, they really have. They're very thoughtful. The next question was, were the pants wet from creek water or urine from body relaxing followed by release of body fluids? Mr. McLeland said he can't answer that. Mr. Baldwin said no. Mr. McLeland said probably calls for too much speculation. Mr. Baldwin says, yeah, I mean, the court says, okay, so no to that one. So, but can't keep in mind as we get into if there is anybody that can. Mr. McLeland says something that's, again, inaudible, one of the 420 something inaudibles in this transcript. Unbelievable. Mr. Baldwin says, I don't think it matters. It doesn't matter to me. Mr. McLeland says some more inaudible things and then says, I'm okay with that. And just more inaudible. Court says, okay, we'll just ask the one. McClellan says, okay. The court says, okay, thank you. Sidebar conference is concluded. These juror questions were in front of the jury, read by the court. Detective, you stated that electronics were being viewed to 1317 before going on the search for the girls initially. What were the electronics that were being viewed? I believe one item was an iPad or a tablet of some sort, and it was locked, so we could only see like phone numbers of missed calls on because it must have been connected via the network or something. And Detective Liggett and I called those numbers, and it was just ended up being people, family, trying to find out where they're at. But that's all we were able to determine at that point. The court says, any follow up, Mr. McLeland? And he does. He says, oh, when you were doing that, where were you at? The sheriff's office. Here in Delphi? Yes. Okay. Yes. And did you know who the iPad belonged to? I don't recall. Okay, I don't have any other questions. Thank you. Mr. Baldwin? No, Your Honor, thank you. All right. Thank you, Detective. You may step down. And referring to the state, she says you can call your next witness. Mr. Luttrell says, thank you, Your Honor. The state would call Sergeant Jason Page. Mr. McLeland says, Judge, we're going to just to make the court aware, we've got to switch exhibits here, so we're going to do that now while she says, that's fine. The witness is approaching. The witness is sworn in. Mr. Luttrell says, Your Honor, if I promise to speak up, is it okay if I stand over here? The court says, sure. So now we get to direct examination of Sergeant Jason Page. Mr. Luttrell asks him, would you state your name for the record, please? Jason Page. Where are you employed? With the Indiana State Police. Can you spell your name and last name for me? And he does. And how long have you been an Indiana State Police officer? 24 years. And what is your current assignment? I've been a crime scene investigator for 16 years. When you began with the state police, did you attend the academy? I did. What's the name of that academy? The Indiana Law Enforcement Academy. And did you complete that training? I did. And what was your first assignment? I was a road trooper assigned to the Peru post. The Peru post? Yes. How long were you a road trooper? Approximately a year and a half. What was your next assignment? I was a detective at the Peru post for 7.5 years. And during that time as a detective, did you have any other duties besides detective duties? I was also on the SWAT team for a period of time. Once you had your 7.5 years as a detective, what was your next assignment? I was on the SWAT team in a part time capacity, so there was a window of about 3 months that I was in a full time capacity before I became a CSI. Tell the jury, what do you do as a CSI? My primary responsibilities are to document crime scenes, and we do that with photography and sketching and notations that we take or observations at the scene. And then we'll also do examinations, for example, looking for fingerprints or trace evidence. Was that your assignment in February of 2017? It was. You've been a CSI for how long? 16 years. Tell us about your education, Sergeant Page. Do you have a college degree? I do. And what's that in? Fine art photography. I graduated from the Heron School of Art, which is attached to Indiana University. As a CSI, do you have special training? I do. Could you describe that to the jury? We have approximately a 1 month training where they teach us the basics in documentation of crime scenes, and then we work with each one of the disciplines in the laboratory. For example, DNA or latent print examiners, and they show us how to collect evidence, for their standards so they can later analyze it. And then since that time, I've had hundreds of hours of additional follow up training in various disciplines throughout the lab. And is your training both formal in terms of specific instruction and is it also on the out in the field training as well? It is. And how long did you have on the job training as a CSI before you had completed that till you're ready to do casework as a crime scene investigator? There's a 6 month period of mentorship. I had three mentors. Each one of them had approximately 20 years of experience each. And then I worked scenes with them. And then after that 6 month period, once I had met all the requirements, then I'm released to work death investigations on my own. During the 6 month period, if it's property crimes, once you're released, the CSI can work those, but it's a 6 month period before you can work death investigations. It may have been somewhere I heard that a crime scene investigator is the laboratory out in the field, the forensic laboratory in the field. That may be not totally accurate, but are you a part of the laboratory system? I am. And do you receive training from lab personnel in the various disciplines of the Indiana State Police Laboratory? I do. Do you work closely with those analysts in the various disciplines at this laboratory? I do. What about forensic pathologists? Do you work with them as well in your field? Yes. And have you worked with a number of forensic pathologists? I have. Who were some that you worked with and submitted cases or interacted and collaborated with on investigations? I worked with Dr. Darren Wolf, Dr. Scott Wagner. Where does Dr. Wolf practice? He works primarily out of Lafayette area, but also Indianapolis. And Dr. Wagner, he works out of Fort Wayne. Any others come to mind that you've worked with over your career? There's been many, and many times, especially in Indianapolis, there's kind of a turnover rate. I mean, I've been working death investigations for 22 years. There's been a variety of them, and many of them I can't remember their names. But so in your time with the state police, both as a detective and with the crime scene investigation unit, how many crime scenes have you processed? I don't keep track of specific numbers. With As a crime scene investigator, I probably have somewhere between 950 to 1,000 scenes, but that doesn't include scenes I worked as a detective or as a trooper. How many homicide scenes have you worked as a crime scene investigator? I would estimate 100. And you've testified before as a CSI? I have. And how many times? Dozens. Have you processed crime scenes with involving serious injuries or death caused by sharp instruments, knives, other sharp instruments? I have. Have you worked crime scene investigations with firearm related evidence, bullets, cartridges, casings, firearms? I have. I'm going to direct your attention to February 14th, 2017. On that day, did you begin your work in this particular case? I did. Who were you contacted by and how do you respond? Brian Olahy, he is was the lead CSI in this case. He works out of the Lafayette Post. He contacted me and requested assistance. Are you on the same level, assigned to a different region than Sergeant Olahy? Yes, we're both assigned to Area 1, which is three different districts. He's out of the Lafayette Post, which Carroll County is assigned to that area, and I'm out of Peru Post, and it's adjacent to. I live in the Kokomo area. Is it unusual for you to work with another state police crime scene investigator? Could you restate the question? Is it unusual for you to collaborate and work with another crime scene investigator? It is not. What about with other departments other than the Indiana State Police? Is it unusual? It is not. In fact, in terms of all the cases that you work, how many times are you assisting or working with non-Indiana State Police agency? I would estimate at least 75% of the work I do is for other agencies as since I've been a CSI primarily. So once you were contacted by Sergeant Olahy, well, first of all, do you know approximately what time he contacted you? I think it was sometime afternoon, shortly afternoon. And do you know what time you arrived? I think I arrived around 1:30, maybe slightly before that. And when you arrived, where did you go? I was asked to park my vehicle up at the cemetery, the old cemetery, the Delphi Cemetery area, and it was kind of a staging area. So I parked there and then I walked down this kind of a steep grade, this hill, where I was told that the other officers were. Did you later, perhaps the following day, go to the Mononhigh Bridge? I did. The area where the cemetery is located, the land between the cemetery and the Mononhigh Bridge and the bridge itself, are those all in Carroll County, Indiana? They are. You were beginning to tell us what you did upon arrival. Did you leave the cemetery area and proceed to some other location? I did. I walked down from the cemetery to where the officers were staged. There was crime scene barrier tape that was set up, and the officers that were present, there was numerous officers there. They were outside the barrier tape, and they had a crime scene log that was being maintained. And I met with Brian Olahy and Dwayne Datzman. Dwayne Datzman is another crime scene investigator that was requested to assist. I believe we hear from both of them coming up. I know Dwayne, but I think Brian Olahy too. You've worked with Olahi before, I think you said? I have many times. Have you worked with Dwayne Datzman? Many times. Was he a sergeant at the time as well? He is. And you were all trained, experienced CSI investigators? Correct. What was the purpose of you meeting there at the edge of the crime scene tape at that point? Primarily to get the initial information or the facts that were known at that time, and then we came up with a rough plan of how we were going to work for that day. The basic plan was for the three of us CSIs to work the area that was inside the barrier tape that had been established, and it was, I estimate, it was approximately the size of a football field, roughly. And then our primary focus was going to be around the immediate area of where the girls were located or where I was told that they were located. And then at the same time, we had other officers that were there at the scene. We arranged for them to search outside that immediate area from the area where they were reported to have last been seen to the barricade tape that we had set up, that area. And then there was also a dive team for people assigned to a dive team that were doing searches of Deer Creek itself. So there was a water rescue team working the creek and actually in the creek. Yes, I saw them there when I arrived. Did they have distinctive apparel or uniform suits that they wear when they're working in the water? They did. Did you prepare a diagram of that would help with the topography of the local area from the area of the high bridge to the cemetery? I did. And did you do a little bit zoned in a little closer? I did. And what do those two diagrams help to illustrate? Well, due to the trees and all the foliage and some of the satellite photographs or the helicopter photographs, it's difficult to get an understanding of the topography of the area. So I merely took a top, topo, topographical map and then just placed basic landmarks on top of them so that we can compare to other maps. Did you strike that? Let me ask this. Did you designate, you and Sergeant Datzman and Sergeant Olahy designate an area that you called Ground Zero? We did. And where was Ground Zero? Through our search of the area, initially we do a visual examination just to see what areas that are obvious to us at the time, and it seemed like from that and during our continual search, all of the primary evidence that we observed was confined within the area of approximately 300 feet in diameter. We did not put crime scene tape around this, but this was the area that we pretty much worked the entire day, and then other officers remained outside. Did you also prepare a diagram based upon images that were maintained or taken at that on February 14th? Did you prepare a diagram that showed the relative location of the two victims in relation to one another and the immediate area at the ground zero? I did. I'm going to show you what we've marked as States Exhibit 18, 19, and 20. Ask if you can identify those for the jury, please. States Exhibit 18, 19, and 20 are diagrams I prepared. 18 and 19, the topographical ones that you prepared, and then 20 is the ground zero drawing based on the scene photographs. Correct. Mr. Luttrell moves to have them all admitted, and Mr. Rosie says, "Can I ask a preliminary question regarding 20, Your Honor?" The court says, "You may." Mr. Rosie says, "Mr. Page, with respect to number 20, this is the diagram of the bodies. Did you do any dimensional research before you placed these on this exhibit?" I did. Okay, and how did you do that? I did an overlay of the 3D diagram or the 3D scan that was later done, and also scene photographs where I'm up in a tree and looking down 90 degrees. And excuse me, when I do transparencies and do an overlay, both the scans and the scene photographs almost perfectly matched. And then I traced the items that were of note in ground zero, so they're in I wouldn't call them to scale 100%, but I put the scale as approximate. Did you, with regard to 18, 19, and 20, did you uh, prepare all of these after I took your statement back in March of 2024. Yes. Okay. I don't have any objection, Your Honor. All right. Without objection, 18, 19, and 20 are admitted. Mr. Luttrell says, thank you, Your Honor. We would move to publish them. The court says you may. They're published. Next question is, I've just been informed that I hold the key here to the next slide, so minor miracle. Would you orient? Mr. Luttrell says, the court, with court's permission, may I have the witness come down to the screen? The court says you may. Could you come down? There's a bit of a high-tech pointer here. Okay. Would you, Sergeant Page, would you show the jury on that diagram the location of the cemetery? Cemetery is in this area here. And where's the Monon Bridge? Monon Bridge is in this area in the center of the frame. And Deer Creek. Deer Creek runs from the left side of the right side through the middle of the frame to this image. And what is downstream of Deer Creek? If I recall correctly, I believe from right to left. So it's flowing towards the left? Correct. It's a little hard for us to see at this point, but there's a yellow triangle there. The exterior or the outer perimeter, would you describe what that is? This is the general location of where the barrier tape was. So for orientation, I parked up in the cemetery area, walked down this grade to this floodplain area, what we call it, and then there was barrier tape in this general location. It's approximately the size of a football field. And there is, I think, we'll see in the next slide, a little bit clearer, but describe for the jury the topography from the cemetery to the crime scene tape. This section here, directly beneath the cemetery, is pretty rough. I don't remember going through that. I could have. It's been 7+ years, but I think most of us walked down the side, more towards the right of this image, and the grade's a little less steep, but you can see by the markings on the map, and it's a fairly steep area. Areas closer to on the cemetery side of Deer Creek, between the high bridge and the barrier tape, the topographical map shows how it's much more sheer, and those can be seen in the scene photographs as well, just to compare the different grades. And this is the sheer area that you're talking about? Correct. One of them. Correct. And did you later spend, on the following 2 days after the 14th, did you spend spend an amount of time in this area here, across the creek from the crime scene tape area? I did. It's a little bit of a zoomed in look at that. There is a line, a yellow dotted line inside the crime scene perimeter. Would you describe for the jury what that is, please? That is a rope line I used just to further designate our approach in and out of the crime scene as we worked throughout the day. I put a little arrow to show that this is the general location where the scene log was, and then we walked straight in, and then I tied a rope to a small tree. And there was kind of a natural tree line in this area, and then we walked this initial distance from where the scene log was to where I tied the rope. We were also systemically examining the ground to see if there would be any potential items of evidence there or any disturbed items. And then, as we're walking through the area and we don't see anything, we feel like that's a safe place as we can approach. And then the same thing was done. After I tied the yellow rope to the tree, we spent a great deal of time just walking that path to make sure that there was nothing there, and we were able to get to a point approximately 20-30 feet away from what we later called ground zero to do our examination, and that's what that dotted line designates. And what other function did this yellow rope, serve for you as investigators working the scene? It also provided a landmark in some of the photographs. For example, in this open courtroom, if we were working this room and we have CSIs or other investigators, and the ones walking one path and others walking another path, it'd create too much disturbance. So we basically used it as a landmark. So if we use the railing in front of the judge's bench, we could all walk along that line, and then with this tape area for the cords down here, we would be like the rope line. We would follow it that in, and then we would go the scene. I have no idea what he's talking about. So your exit and entrance into the scene as you were that day, you follow that path. For what reason? Because we knew that there were no items of potential evidence there, and we were going to continue all throughout the day to any additional searches in these other locations. We were merely trying to find a safe location that we could walk in, do an initial approach on the bodies, and just see what evidence was there. You arrived into that crime scene taped area sometime between or before 2 p.m. Is that correct? Correct. And you left that crime scene area that evening at approximately what time? 10:20 p.m. Go to the next slide. This is Exhibit 20, and what are we looking at here? This is a top-down bird's eye view of the items that we observed within what we called Ground Zero. And describe for the jury the objects in what they're looking at the in on the exhibit in front of you. The item on the far right, this blob, I just labeled it tree. I put a legend at the top because sometimes arrows can be disorienting and cover up the area. So there's a legend at the top that shows these other items. But the ones I have labeled, there's a tree, which is this blob on the far right hand side. And on the far left hand side, there's another blob that I've also labeled as a tree. So it'd be like the tree was cut and you're looking top down on it. Sergeant Page, you stated that one of the resources you used to create this ground zero diagram was a 3D imaging photography. And does that capture an area from a top down like that and display on its imaging the tree, the top of the tree that is depicted in your diagram? Yes. And go ahead. What else do we see? This outline of this body is Libby German. This is the outline of this body. The outline of this body to the left of Libby is Abby. And then these gray, linear, irregular shaped items, these are various branches that were located on top of their bodies. There's a larger one that I would call a limb that's on top of Libby's body. There are some others that are on the ground, twigs and branches near their feet area. And then on the legend, there's a dotted circle that represents an exposed dirt area. So the only disturbed ground where it was obvious that leaves and other items were missing was this little indentation on the ground at the bottom of this diagram. And then the pale red areas on the diagram are the primary blood stains that we located and observed within the scene. Thank you. Instead of having you return to your seat, I'm just going to go ahead and ask you or hand you a number of exhibits if you're comfortable with that and ask you to take your time. Well, why don't we have you have a seat so that you can use I'm going to hand you Stace Exhibit 21 to 67. I'm going to ask you to look at them with this question in mind. Are those photographs that you took on February 14th, February 15th, and February 16th at this location that you described? Yes. Do they truly and accurately depict the scene and illustrate your testimony? They do. Mr. Luttrell moves to have those exhibits admitted. Mr. Rosie says no objection. The court says all right without objection. 21 to 63 inclusive are admitted. And next question. Sergeant Page, why don't you go ahead and return on the screen and we'll proceed. This would be Exhibit 21. What are you looking at here? This photograph, the exhibits were published. This photograph was taken from the vantage point of where I was standing after I signed into the crime scene log and I'm facing Deer Creek. In the foreground, at the bottom center of the scene, is the crime scene barrier tape. And then you can see parallel just above it is Deer Creek in the distance. Farther beyond in this frame, you can see primarily you can see it primarily in the upper left hand portion. This is the other side of the creek, and it's a much higher elevated grade. This is a private property on this side. And in the center of the frame on this image, when it's zoomed up, and you can see that there's a yellow rope that's dangling from a tree. So this is the rope that I tied. So after we examined the area from the barrier tape straight in and we didn't see any items of potential evidence in that area, I then went back to the barrier tape just to document the process, and I photographed the rope before I strung it out. I think we can expand it slightly maybe, but it's right in this area here. It is. It's tied to this small tree, and the rest of the rope is just dangling on the ground. And are the location of the bodies of Abby Williams and Libby German, are they there in the frame of the photograph? They are not. They would be located farther near the left-hand side of the frame. Exhibit 22, what do we see here? On the right side of the frame, you can see the small tree that I tied to the yellow rope to with the rest of the rope, as I previously described, is on the ground. And then in the middle of the frame, just left of center in the distance, is the body of Libby German and Abby Williams. These trees here appear to have a natural line, and then the topography, even though it's more flat in this area, there is some variation to it. So there's almost like a small little ridge. And these trees are all along that area. And this is the path that we took to make our ingress. Is that area flat? It's not completely flat, but it's flatter than the other areas. It's very hilly and steep in most of the other locations. Is there dips and small little areas of the area going up and down throughout the area? How many times did he say area? One, in one sentence. Two, three. Just pointing that out. As an English communications major, I see things like that, and it drives me crazy when you use the same word to explain the something. Okay, anyways. He says I would consider this a floodplain area. And what do you see in Exhibit 23? The rope line in the previous image is now located on the far left-hand side of the tree, or rather of the image here, and the rope is on the ground. All this is in the previous image. I took it with the rope on the right hand of the image. Now I've kind of stepped off of this natural tree line just to show the vantage point on the other side towards the bodies of Libby and Abby. In the center of the screen, slightly above it in the background, you can see the farther perimeter areas of the crime scene barrier tape. And then Deer Creek kind of moves around this bend above in this image around where the barrier tape is. And then it goes kind of curves around off to the right hand side. You can also see in this area that this plane kind of dips down a little bit. So this area from the left center to the middle kind of dips down a little bit, so there's just variations to observe as you're looking at the image. Point again to where the body of Libby is. The right hand center portion of the frame is the body of Libby German, adjacent to this tree. And Abby Williams would be just to her left, or to our left? Yes. Exhibit 25, I believe this is. This is a close-up from the same basic vantage point using a zoom lens. I just merely zoomed up on that same location to see the girls' bodies from the place that I was standing. Libby is at the base of this tree near the right side, the left side of this frame. Left lower center is Abby. And you can see in the center horizon, just slightly above the center, is the crime scene barrier tape, and you can see also the variations of the topography of the ground in this area. As you're taking photographs, what is your process that you follow in taking crime scene photographs? Every crime scene I work has the same general process where I photograph from general to specific. So I always want to show the general location. For example, if it's a house that's in a suburban neighborhood, I want to show not just the house that the crime scene's at, I want to show the neighborhood in general so we can get an idea of what we're looking at. Or if it's a rural house surrounded by farm acreage, that could be significant too, because in that context, maybe there were no witnesses because it's in a remote location, for example. In this particular scene, all these initial photographs were to show the general area, its topography, the relationship of the creek, and the other landmarks of the bodies and the deceased victims. So basically, his job was to take pictures and to take the pictures in such a way that you would be able to show off different landmarks and things of that nature by showing different angles and perspectives and whatnot, especially in relationship to the creek, the bridge, the bodies, all that. So they want a good um, idea of where everything is in relation to one another. Exit 26. Sorry, not exit. Exhibit 26. Does that show the large limb that's there over a portion of Libby's body? It does. And I believe in the foreground is the portion of exposed dirt that I'd mentioned earlier in the diagram. I believe it states Exhibit 20. There's a large limb on top of her. And then this photograph, too, is the wider shots I consider very general. This is what I consider more of a medium shot to show the immediate area of the girls' bodies and their location. And this is generally the area this bowl, circle area of trees around this area is what we later determined to be ground zero. Does photo 26 illustrate the kind of topography that the girls' bodies were within? It does. Just briefly say that just briefly say what you mean by that. Yeah, this isn't a brief answer. His None of his answers are brief. It's kind of like a slight grade uh, from above Abby's body, and these trees are much higher up. So if the horizon line of this pointer stick is right here in the middle, you can kind of see how this rises up towards the left. The immediate area where Libby is kind of more of a valley type area. And then in the distance, this grassy area that you see in the center of the frame near the top, this is the bank of the creek. See a bit of a rise there, and then there's trees. And then this darker portion, this kind of dark section that follows the upper middle horizon line, is another grade for this very sheer surface. And in this area, the far right hand corner, you can see there's coloration between a coloration difference between this grass, this dark, I'm sorry, I touched the screen. He says, all right, from the grass that creates one band of color. Then there's a darker color, and then there's a darker brown, then a lighter brown, and then you can see the skyline with the trees and the horizon. This lighter band color, that's where there was an access road, and there's a slight increased grade that goes up to a private road off in the distance. This photo, you're moving around in a sort of a circular fashion or to your right as you're taking these photos. I am. Again, you moved slightly to your right to capture that view. I am. And just for landmarks, you can see in the distance in the center of the frame along the horizon line is the crime scene barrier tape, that portion of it. As you're standing taking this photograph, where's the creek? Is it right behind you? I believe the creek would be over my right shoulder-ish. It kind of curves around, but it's going to be on the left side, or I'm sorry, the right side of the frame in this image generally. And flows around though past this in a curvature fashion. Is that correct? Yes, and the way that I'm standing, oriented towards the screen, the right side of the screen, as I'm facing it, this is the general location my body was in relation to the creek. So the creek would have been towards my back and the moving off to the right. Could we return to the previous exhibit? For orientation purposes, on the left-hand screen, or left-hand side of the screen, you can see two yellow lines. The one that's near the top, that's the barrier tape, and then below that is the rope line. You can see where my rope line goes from the left to the right. It's tied around another small tree. I'm sorry, I touched the screen again. It's kind of hard not to do that, he says. But anyways, you can see where the rope line then comes to the base of some other trees, and that's basically where we made our approach. So in this particular exhibit, you can see a foot of, of Libby, and then this is the limb that I mentioned before. Not to mention far from her foot, I believe is the exposed dirt area, not too far from her foot. And then you can see the rope in the distance. So this would be the path that we took in from left to right in this frame, but along the rope line. And then beyond the rope line, because it gets kind of confusing with all the yellow lines, that's actually the barrier tape. And just for visual impression on the film, it looks close, but it's actually quite some distance away. And then it wraps around clear past the other part of the frame towards the right. Okay, so you've been describing Exhibit 28. Let's go to 29. You just moved slightly again, and are the bodies of the victims obscured in this photo? Not necessarily. You can see the body in the center lower portion of the frame. You can see the body of Abby. The body of Libby appears to be obscured from the larger limb on the other tree. And I'm moving counterclockwise as these photographs are being taken. And then again, you can see in the left of center horizon area the rope line in this location, and then it dangles down. And then the crime scene barrier tape is in the distance. And in the far scene, this actually has a pretty good picture where you can see more of that gray. Because the gray, where the cemetery is, it goes off the frame more to the left, but it's very difficult to photograph that because you can't see the skyline because it goes kind of straight up. So this area, it starts to taper down in the far distance, so uh, you can get an idea of how steep that is. And then off to the right side of the frame, that's the direction of the creek. Exhibit 30, and you continued in your clockwise route here as you're taking photographs. Yes. 31 and 32. In States Exhibit 32, you can see the rope line better, which trees it is attached to, and then as it comes to the scene and in the distance, you can see officers that are outside the crime scene barrier tape, and then in red with I believe yellow helmets or something of that sort. It's hard to make out, but I believe those are members of the dive team. And in photograph 33, States Exhibit 33, we're looking with the creek in the background. Correct. And this is just again your moving counterclockwise. Was there anything of note that you noticed in this photograph besides getting a picture of where the creek is in relation to the bodies? Could you be more specific? Well, let me just ask, if someone were at the bank of the creek in this area or across the creek, would the bodies of the victims be obscured? I don't recall me going across the creek while the bodies were there, but I did go across the creek for the next 2 days and I took additional photography, and there are variations there that I don't know how difficult it would be to see, but 34. You're elevated when you take this photograph? Yes, I have a ladder that's in my truck, so I extended the ladder, put it in various locations so I can put more of a top-down view. One of the methods I use in my photography is for every scene, I not only go from the general to the medium to the specific to take technical photographs. I should also note that photography is continual. We take photographs when we arrive. Every activity we do, we photograph. You go from the least intrusive to the most intrusive. So we'll photograph everything as it is in its place. So if I was doing the courtroom now, I would have all the items on these desks exactly where they are and show them from the general to the medium to the specific. But I also will document things from the top down so you can kind of have a visual map from a bird's eye view of the relationship because it's all about the relationships of these different items. So they took one particular way from eye level as you're standing, but then I'll get above them 90 degrees and photograph downwards. And whenever I can, I get my camera down as low as I can to show the low-lying surfaces plane, on the ground plane, but then also from low to high in cases there'd be any evidence or stains or something, for example, underneath the table. So this is part of the process where I'm not quite 90 degrees, but I'm on a ladder and I'm showing kind of a 45-degree angle, top down, just to show the relationships of the girls' bodies with the ground zero area with Deer Creek in the background. You can see how this floodplain kind of continues in the distance where it's lighter, and then where it gets darker is a more of a steeper grade up to the other side. The Monon Bridge is located. It can't be seen with all the trees in this view, but it would be this area near the horizon line in the top center of this image. Exhibit 35, that's another top-down view. Correct. And in this image, no, go ahead. In this image, it gives a better viewpoint. There is a red stained area here on the ground, and that is more visible than the previous photographs. 36. This is a top-down view where I'm on a ladder between the crack of this tree and I photograph down at a 90-degree angle to map out the different items within the scene. This is one of the images I used in conjunction with a 3D scan of the scene to put the locations of all these various items. Exhibit 37, and now we go to 38. You continued your clockwise movements of the creek in the background. Is that correct? Correct. And in this particular image, I used a technique called fill flash. Because of all the shadows, it's difficult to see and to take out that contrast. This image shows there is another blood stain, apparent blood stain, on the ground at the bottom of the frame. Then the upper middle portion, you can see the bodies of Libby and Abby. And then at the top, you can see where Deer Creek is located in relationship to them. This creek that's in the image in the foreground with the victims in the background, did you examine that tree as well? I did. And what did you notice on that tree? This was the only tree in the area that I observed blood stain evidence in this portion of the tree. I don't know offhand, how high it was, maybe 3 feet. Without looking at measurements, I can't remember. There were stains on this side of the tree, and then halfway between where the stain is and the base of the tree on the ground, on the right hand of the side of this on the image too, the right hand side of the tree as we're looking at it was another area of bloodstain evidence. And then beyond this, the that larger stain I mentioned earlier in the other states exhibits is probably obscured from this tree. Exhibit 39, does that illustrate the location of the large blood area that you had on the ground zero diagram? It does. Would you point this out to the jury, please? It's in the center lower portion of the frame. You can see it in relationship to their feet. And this photograph also shows the grade of the terrain in this area, and you can see the grass. This is one of the photographs I'd mentioned earlier where I start to get from a lower vantage point. So I went to get everything from a 360 general to more specific from high level than I got from a higher vantage point down. Now, this is the portion where I'm getting down near the ground level, and then I took hundreds of photographs. Many of them are from an eye level vantage point and some of them low to high, and this is an example of one of those photographs. Exhibit 40. Now we'll go to 41. Is this the large stain that you had in exhibit 39? It is. You were there in person. Describe what you noticed about the quantity of blood that you saw at that location. Later during the search, this is the following day, I did a systematic search of the entire area. So I would examine all the branches, all of the twigs, any items in that immediate area, and look to see if there'd be any other items of potential evidence on those items. Then later, When I removed all of the leaves and such, this whole area seemed to be saturated still with a large quantity of blood. 41 or 42 shows the image of Abby Williams. It does. I'm sorry. I meant to have a lead in to that photograph. You took close-up photographs for what reason? To show more details, to show trace evidence. And the next slide is a close-up of Libby's face. Correct. And were you wanting to document the pattern of blood and where the blood was located on her body? It's in just general showing all the details you can. One of the things I do in death investigations is I make sure I focus on the head, the hands, and the feet, and any other items or injuries that are going to be on the bodies. But I often, and we did it at this scene, I'll take a tarp and lay it. We'll examine the area that we're immediately standing in to see if there's any items of potential evidence that's apparent to us. If the area appears clear, this is part of what I mentioned earlier about you're going from the least intrusive to the more intrusive. So we're not moving anything at this time, but you have to eventually get closer to the evidence you're looking at. So I put a tarp, could have put a plastic bag on the ground, so I'm not transferring anything or disturbing anything. And then I spent a great deal of time with each of the victims, just looking at their hands, analyzing them with a flashlight. A lot of times you use a flashlight and look with oblique lighting to see if you can see any trace evidence on their fingers. We're looking at the hands. There's just dozens and dozens of similar photographs like this. That's a representative photograph of some of these. In this particular exhibit, there are fragments of organic material. Sorry? On the face, and that's what we're looking at. There's some here in the mouth, some in the eye, some in the forehead. This shows the relationship of the head with the organic material. Would this photograph 44 be the left hand of Abby Williams? It is. On the lower right-hand portion of this image, the bark that's covered in the moss in this area, that's actually the large tree, and then this is her left hand. 45. 46 is her right hand. Yes, in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the skin on the side of her body just for orientation purposes. And again, this is a representative photograph of numerous close-up photographs showing details, looking for stains, trace evidence, anything else that would be in the area. 45, excuse me, 48 is the photograph here. Did you have, as a team, concentrate on the one area and one victim first before you went to the next victim? We did. What was the purpose of that? Well, in the particular case of Libby, because she's unclothed, it's easier to see trace evidence and any injuries and document this area. And because Libby had multiple layers of clothes and stuff, we know that a lot of the trace evidence is going to be between those layers. So it was just easier to start the one. And quite frankly, we had to start someplace. So we just started with her. But you didn't. My point is, you did not do both, process both victims at the areas around them and examining them. You did not do that at the same time. No. You did one after the other. Correct. Can you go back to the previous state's exhibit just for confusion? 48. In this particular image, the tree that's to the left, there's a lot of red hue. It's kind of brown reddish, at least from the vantage point I'm standing looking at the screen. It looks red. But on closer inspection, this is all just areas of bark and there are no stains on the surfaces of that tree. Really? It looks red, but it's not blood. Okay. Cool. Tell me some more lies to my face when I can see things with my own eyes. If there's all these red spots on the tree that look like blood, but they're saying it's not blood. It's just the bark. Red bark, apparently, in Indiana. Don't know. Exhibit 49 shows a blood pattern on her right thigh. Yes. And I think that's documented in some other photographs we'll get to later today, but you wanted to make sure you captured that as well. Yes. Did you take photographs of that from various angles? It's just part of the process. Any item that's going to be captured in this, again, it's just a process of going from the general to specific. Those pictures are all taken prior to moving any objects or moving the bodies. State's Exhibit 50 has numbers on the ground. Would you explain to the jury what they're seeing there? This is a photograph I took later that night with the flash, or maybe it just appears to be later because it's just an effect of the flash. I can't remember which. But on the left hand side of the frame, this tree is the one that we saw bloodstain evidence on. Remember, this is the F tree I'm sure he's talking about. You can see the stains on this upper portion near the upper left hand side of the image, and then midway down closer to the ground, you can see another bloodstain pattern that we located. I can't remember which. I think it might be where the placard number 1 is. I didn't put these placards there. They were from Brian Olahi, and he was marking areas that he was going to collect representative uh, stain samples, and I believe one designates the area of where another stain of blood was on the ground. I can't recall what two marks. It could be some other leaves that may have been stained. I don't recall. If you don't know, don't say. Somebody else is going to testify to that, so don't say. Did Sergeant Olahi, as the CSI for this region, did he collect all of the evidence from the crime scene? The majority of it. On February 14th? Yes. And that was one of the roles he played. You did not collect evidence on February 14th. I did not. My role is to assist Sergeant Olahi as needed. You see a few other numbers there, 3 and 4, and were they placed there by Sergeant Olahi? I believe they were. And were they marking evidence that was collected from those approximate areas? Yes, and for orientation, you can see that the tree in that previous image, there's bloodstain evidence here, and then, I don't know, it could be just slightly off the frame is where the placard number 2 is, but this also could have been taken before those placards were put there. I can't recall. You said that you remained at the scene until approximately 10:30? We did. And did you return the following day? I did. And did you return to this specific location on the following day? I did. When once, let's say for just a moment on the 14th of February, once it began to be late afternoon, did you notice any changes in temperature? I did. And what did you notice? It became colder. And through the night that you were there, did that continue? Yes. And when you returned the next day, do you know what time you returned? I thought it was around 10. It's sometime after 9, before 11:30. I can't recall offhand. That would be on Wednesday, February the 15th. Is that correct? I don't know if it was a Wednesday, but I know it was the following day. The question I wanted to ask you on the 14th, were you carrying any firearms and any ammunition on that day? I was. And what were you carrying? I can't remember if I was carrying a Glock 19. I'm pretty sure I was, and it's a 9mm. If you were carrying something else, what would it have been? Pretty much all I carry, if I would, and I seldom carry it, we have a Sig Sauer 45 caliber 227, and I only wear that when I'm in uniform or in some other capacity. And the Glock, is that a standard issue for Indiana State Police? No, I believe this was my personal firearm. We're allowed to carry, this is going back a while. I can't remember, but for a long period of time, if you qualify with your personal firearm, you can carry it. And at some point, the department stated we can't carry personal firearms, so now we carry Sig Sauer P365, which are 9mm, and that's what I primarily carry. Remember, the bullet that they're saying is Richard Allen's is a 9mm. I don't know when that was issued, but it was either a 9mm Glock or a 9mm Sig Sauer. Did you have a 40 caliber ammunition that day? I did not. Or was Allen's 40 caliber? Maybe Allen's was 40 now. I can't remember, but they're saying no, he did not. And when you returned the following day, did you do any chemical tests on the crime scene at this point or at this location? I did. Would you explain to the jury what you did? Well, to begin with, we just were looking for any additional evidence in daylight because once we lost the daylight hours, we could only do so much. I mean, it is beneficial to look at some items with the flashlight. We had some area lights out there as well, but to do additional thorough searches, we needed to have daylight. So I arrived there with two other CSIs, which was Dwayne Datzman and Jerry Mihalik. We were the primary ones that returned to the scene, and the purpose of that was for Jerry Mahalik, and Dwayne Datzman to examine the area, and then beyond that, ground zero area with metal detectors. And while they were doing that, I was looking for any other additional blood contains on any other items, contents, I think that's supposed to be contents, on any other items or objects in that immediate area without disturbing the ground cover at this time. I didn't see any other additional blood stains, so we look at the one tree that seemed to have blood stains on its vertical surfaces. And I used a chemical called leucocrystal violet, which is a reagent for blood. It's also a presumptive positive test for blood, and all it does is either it's primarily used for latent blood stains. So, a latent image or a latent blood stain or a latent print impression is just something you can see readily with the eyes. So, with fingerprints, you have to use some kind of powder to enhance it to make it visible. And with latent blood stains, you use a chemical that just develops the image that would be there that you can't see. And especially due to the bark surfaces, it's difficult to distinguish the different pigmentation of the tree from the stain. So I applied leucocrystal violet to that area and to other areas within the scene. Looking at States Exhibit 52, is that a photograph of what it looked like after you applied the chemical? It is. Leucocrystal violet turns a violet color, and when it reacts to heavier areas or more dense areas of blood stains, it tends to as part of the chemical reaction, it'll tend to foam a little bit. So it's not so much the pigment, this is what's very visible in this image if is you're looking at the foaming aspects. What I was looking for is if there was any other blood stains that were blending into the coloration of the tree, and I didn't see really any other reactions outside of what was obviously visible previously. Did you know that whether or not any swabs of the blood on that tree had been obtained on the night before? I do. And who did that? I believe Brian Olahy. So this evidence had already been taken from that area where the blood was observed on the tree. Correct. He took representative stain samples from numerous locations. One question I wanted to ask you about let's go back to the next slide, then we'll get to that. What do you see here in 53? It's the portion that's a little lower on the counterclockwise portion of that same tree, and no additional latent stains in that area developed. It was primarily just these heavier areas. When the chemical that was applied to them, they tend to foam up, so that's what these lighter colored areas are. It's just the foaming action of those thicker stains. In the previous night, had you measured these areas from the ground to document the relative height from the ground of these different stains on the tree? Yes. In addition to having the 3D scans, which is more detailed in placement, we also used conventional measuring methods of using regular surveyor tapes and scales and such to document then before the evidence is collected. Exhibit 54 is the tree in the just off center to the right in this photograph. Is that the tree that Libby's body was next to? Yes. What does 54 illustrate? This is much later from the previous state's exhibits we just looked at. This is midway through the portion where I started with this tree and worked outward from there, the tree that you had mentioned, and I examined systemically all the sticks, the twigs, the branches, and the leaves to see if there was any other items of evidence or if there would have been something underneath that ground cover. This is one representative photo of this where eventually everything within that, what we designated as ground zero, and then beyond it several feet, just kept peeling that back. But at some point, with every crime scene, there has to be parameters. You have to just come to the point like, how far do we go? Do I do an acre? So I basically just took this probably 5 or 6 feet outside of ground zero, and this is part of that process. And then in the foreground, you can see this. This is before I completely uncovered it, but this is the area that was that large stain with the leaves. And then in the distance, you can see in the center top of this image, you can see Deer Creek, and there's divers that are continuing to search the entire time I was at this area. I spent, I don't know how many hours I spent there, but I spent most of the remainder of the day at that area. What a long-winded answer. Was scene security maintained from the time that you arrived on the 14th until once you arrived on the 15th? Was there remaining scene security present? There were. Did you return? Here's another photograph, 55, of the same process you described that. This is from a different angle. Did you return on the following day, the 16th? I did. We're going to look at States Exhibit 56, the photograph of the Monon Bridge. Which end is? Are you positioned when you look at this photograph? I believe I'm in the lower left-hand corner, this side of the public side. Deer Creek is running underneath the bridge. In the left-hand side of the frame, you can kind of see how sheer the bank is and the topography of this area. In the middle section, near the top, you can kind of see where this floodplain is, and you can see it's kind of irregular because especially the trees that are along the bank kind of create a little slight rise in the ground there. But this is all wooded, but this is the area that I would call a floodplain. It also continues on the far right hand side of the frame where you can kind of see how dense the trees were and the topography of the ground. And just to make sure we're oriented, Sergeant Page, where would the victims be? The bodies have been discovered. They would be somewhere in the center top of the frame, around upstream around the bend. Is that correct? Correct. What did you notice about the condition of this bridge when you were there on the 16th, February 16th? You can see in this image that there were no handrails or guardrails off the side. It's just exposed old timber. Many pieces of the timber were very rotted, and there were many gaps where some of the railroad timbers were missing altogether. Did you cross that bridge yourself? I did. Do you have a fear of heights? Not if I trust what I'm standing on, but I walked it. Yeah, I wouldn't trust standing on that thing. And how would you describe that process, being on it? I thought it was a little shaky, but I walked across the bridge. What are we looking at here on Exhibit 57? In the upper left-hand portion of the frame, you can see there's some kind of barrier there that's on the public side. Then you have the bridge that runs along the left-hand side of the frame. And there's some of these boards that kind of create a platform. I'm standing on one of those platforms, looking towards the Monon Trail itself, the public walking trail, and then the entire remainder of the frame from the center to the right shows how sheer this kind of cliff edge is. We can kind of see how the topography rises from the high bridge up a little higher. And then in the lower left hand corner, you can clearly see the creek, and you can even see that you can see in the creek a little bit. You can see the water, the creek bottom. What are we looking at in photograph 59? Excuse me, 58. Now I'm at the exact opposite direction. So this previous image, I was looking towards the public side, and now I'm looking at the private side. So the upper right-hand corner, you can see another barrier, which is a mirror image of one of the public side. Somebody put crime scene barrier tape up in this location. Near the upper horizon of this image, you can see this light green sandy color. This is all a large lawn area from a residence. Near the center of the frame, you can kind of see where this home was, and I don't know what the address is. I don't know who lives there. And then in the lower left hand corner of the frame, this is a gravel drive. I looked it up on the map. It said north 625 west. So I don't know if it's considered a county road or a private drive or an access road. I don't know what you'd call it, but it comes in this area and there's a slight elevation. I had mentioned it previously in other exhibits, and then it ties into the private residence. And then the lower left hand side of this image is this gravel area that kind of extends just as distance from there to that barrier from the high bridge. So the high bridge is off the frame at the bottom. And then to the immediate left, I noticed that the leaves seem to have been displaced because there's this exposed dirt area that goes down this grade. This grade is steep, but it's navigable. And then it goes to this access road, and then again going to the left-hand side of the frame. This area just the other side of the access road is pretty steep, but it leads to a large floodplain area that I mentioned previously, and the location of the bodies of Libby and Abby would be somewhere beyond in these trees on the left-hand side of the frame. Across the creek? Yes, and this was taken 2 days later. The next photograph was taken from that access road you described, looking back up towards the bridge and that area you just described, the darkened area on the just to the side of the bridge. Is that correct? Correct. Coming down the hill. Correct. That's the upper left-hand portion of this image. I've now walked past the high bridge, gone down this grade, standing on the access road, and when you're using wide angle lenses and even zoom lenses, it is a bit of a compression. So this looks like it's a far distance, but I don't recall it being very far. But this goes back to the bridge. The road is relatively level, but to the immediate right, that's off the frame. There's kind of a steep grade, and that leads into the floodplain. Mr. Luttrell says, "May we approach, Your Honor?" The court says, "You may." And there was a brief sidebar. Mr. Luttrell says, "Just briefly, I this is going a little longer than I wanted. I have not too much longer to do." The court says, "Okay, we're going to have to break between direct and cross." Mr. Luttrell says, "That's what I thought. So, do you want a break now?" And Mr. Rosie says, "Well, why don't you finish it and then we'll take a break." The court says, "No, we're going to finish direct. We're going to finish direct, but we're going to have to break between direct and cross." Mr. Rosie says, "Okay, and just do lunch probably?" The court says, "Probably." Mr. Luttrell says, "Probably. Do you want a break now?" The court says, "No, no, just finish your direct." Exhibit 60, sir. Where are you located when you took this photograph? I walked from the high bridge down off the access road, and you could see in the distance this dark line near the center of the frame, kind of diagonal line on the left-hand side of the frame. That's the high bridge. You can see daylight from underneath it and above it through the trees. This is what I consider a type of floodplain area that has all these trees in it. I walked a little bit farther upstream than the location of the scene, the primary scene, ground zero, and I'm standing on this kind of shallow rock area, so I could be in the middle of the creek without getting too wet. And so this is the majority of the frame is the creek as it goes downstream and then turns around this bend towards the high bridge. Next photograph is number 61. Is that from the same location now looking across the bridge, or I mean across the creek? Yes, from this vantage point, the previous state's exhibit I'm looking at where the high bridge was to my left, and then I've just merely pivoted to my right and I'm showing the other side, the other bank of Deer Creek, and you can see in the middle left, the middle right hand portion of this image, some of the barrier tape that's up, and that was the farthest or area out. You always want to establish whenever you're working a scene, you always want to be very generous and take whatever area that is apparent that seems to be involved, and you pick a much larger area because until you've examined it, you don't exactly know what the parameters are. So that's why the barrier tape was this far out. Now, more towards the center of the frame, where you see these prominent trees are inward from the that towards the cemetery area is where the scene was located. So the barrier tape that you mentioned, the crime scene tape on the right-hand side, would that be upstream, the upstream edge of the crime scene area? Correct. It's that outside leg. Look at State's Exhibit 62. It's similar to the previous exhibit. You can see the crime scene barrier tape near the middle lower portion near the center, and then the area out to the right of that, this part of the bank. All these areas of the banks were examined for days by numerous people, myself included. We didn't see anything along these areas of the bank that were upstream, and you could see that the sides of the bank are much more sheer. You have a more steeper grade. This area near the left of the frame of the bank, it's kind of a grassy area, and that's one location has a more shallow grade. But these other areas, especially these trees that are right near the creek bank, it's kind of an elevated area. And how would you designate the area as a shallow or more gradual bank? I should say that area was where in relation to where the bodies were found approximately. The bodies were just from that grassy portion, as I recall it. All of course, again, I have a wide angle lens and there's some compression and it adds a little disorientation. But in this particular image, I'm thinking more from left to right and kind of in. It would be near the center-ish of the frame. When you were at the crime scene on February 14th and you were near the body of Abby Williams, did you notice anything about the condition of her clothing, particularly the jeans that she had on? Yes. What did you notice? My recollection is that her clothes were damp, but it's been so long and I didn't make specific notes. I don't know exactly where it was damp. I just remember her clothes seeming damp. And I think it's our final photograph, 63, that simply is from looking more straight on to the bank from that location from the rocks where you were standing. Correct. I'm just making quarter turn clockwise. So I went from one end to the bank to the other end of the bank, and now I'm showing the extreme other side where you can see not only the end of the barrier tape, but you can also see all this other terrain that's more upstream on the right-hand side of the frame, and then ground zero would be located somewhere beyond these trees in the center left portion of the frame. You may return to your seat. A group of CSIs gathered again on Sunday, the 19th of February, is that correct? They did. And did you participate in that? I did. And how do you recall how many Indiana State Police crime scene investigators participated in that search? I believe there was 9, including myself. Thank you. I have no further questions. The court says, as I indicated up here at the bench, we're going to have to take a break. It's 11:30, so I think we'll just do an early lunch. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long morning for you, and I apologize that we kind of went through the break, but we will go ahead and break. While you're outside the courtroom, please keep your minds open. Please don't form any opinions out, don't form any opinions or conclusions about anything. You may discuss the evidence that you've heard so far. But please, only if all 16 of you are present in the room at the same time. Don't deliberate. Gentlemen. Bailiff says, all rise. The jury leaves at 11:30 a.m. and the court says, you may be seated. Is there anything we need to do outside the presence of the jury? Mr. McLeland says, no, Your Honor. Mr. Rosie says, no, Judge. Let's be back here at 1 o'clock then. We'll give them a little bit more of a break. Mr. Rosie says, thank you, Judge. The court says, thank you, and off the record. So we will end here for today. As I said, that one went a little bit longer, but it's just how it goes sometimes. So we will pick up right where we left off in the state's case, part 7, where we will continue with Jason Page, his testimony, and Dwayne Datzman is next. Dwayne Datzman is going to be called after Sergeant Jason Page. So we will hear from him as well. And Brian Olahy will be after that. So I told you those names that they were mentioning in their testimony. We will hear from them. So Brian Olahy and Dwayne Datzman, who were also there on the scene doing evidence collection and such. So that is where I leave you. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, comment. Let me know what you guys are thinking about the testimony in this trial so far. And I will see you in the next one. Bye now.